Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox Podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Team Tuesday this week with Rayyan Karim. Hey, Rayyan, welcome back.
Hey, Vasco.
So today's Tuesday, and we'll talk about teams, how sometimes, despite our best efforts, and sometimes because of our best efforts, they get into trouble. But before that, do share with us, what's the book that most influenced you in your career as a Scrum Master?
In my career as a Scrum Master, the best book I could ever recommend for someone to read is actually a concise PDF that you can download on Google. You can type in The Profound System of Change by Edward Deming. That, probably I should say the Scrum Guide, but it's very useful as a Scrum Master, right? However, there's a broader concept around agility, which is about complex adaptive systems. And if you really want to understand the true intent, and from my point of view, the beginning of agility, you should really read this thesis and this body of work called The Profound System of Knowledge by Edward Deming. And it will help you really understand the change that's happening in your workplace in a wider context, right? So that's my favorite book. I mean, it helps you understand that all things are interrelated. It helps you learn what a system is. It helps you learn different ways that people think as leaders and as people in the organization. It helps you understand motivation from an intrinsic and an extrinsic point of view, which is really fascinating when you apply that to organizational change and what agility is trying to achieve. And it also gives you different ways, different tools, different measures, different metrics for how you can look at variation and therefore improve systemically, and how you can not tamper, how you can not get in the way of team performance by changing too quickly without seeing the results. So it lends itself very well to systemic experimentation and getting better quickly. And so if you can wrap your head around it, that is a game changer, that PDF, if you can find it online.
Absolutely. And we'll put the link to the show notes, make sure people easily find it. And definitely Deming is one of my favorite readings, although I have to be honest, it's not necessarily the easiest of readings. But once you do get into it, it's definitely very rewarding and very insightful. Let's not forget that Deming is one of the people behind the big quality drive in post-war Japan. He's behind TQM, or Total Quality Management, and also one of the philosophers behind what later became Lean. Not just that, but also Lean, that we talk about a lot also in the Agile community. So, yeah. Rayyan, that was the book. Now we turn our attention to the teams and how sometimes they start doing these small things, like small behavior, small patterns that over time grow and lead to really big problems. So tell us the story, walk us through the context a little bit so that we know where the team is, how big it is, and then walk us through how those small, perhaps even hints of behavior at the start developed over time and led to problems for that team.
Okay, so the example I'm going to give is a scaled example. Most of my experience, because the career path was quite quick, most of my experience is in scaled agility and leading large transformations. So this example was actually in Brazil, right, which was a very amazing experience because everyone was speaking Portuguese and I have no Portuguese, so that was interesting. But we managed to pull it off. I was working, so it's a big bank called Itaú. I was working with IBM and they brought me in to sort of fix the relationship between Itaú and IBM. The relationship was going wrong because IBM was helping with a digital transformation and the teams were starting to self-destruct. Not just the delivery teams, but also the middle management and also the executive teams. They were all at loggerheads and no one could really understand why. They all agreed on the strategy, but when it was coming around to implementation, they couldn't quite get anything delivered. Their quality wasn't high enough. Obviously, they were giving deadlines and the deadlines weren't being met. Approvals were taking time. They couldn't figure out, I think it was a 300-person program. They couldn't figure out how they weren't able to be successful. In their mind, they'd thrown everything at it. They'd thrown the budget, they'd thrown the expertise, they'd created a new working environment, They were using agility, so they thought. They were using service design, so they thought, and they just weren't able to get anything done. Right? They had literally delivered nothing in 9 months, to the point where this is a $2 billion relationship, and they were about to leave and find another consultancy to work with. And it was my job to save the day by finding those dysfunctions and helping the team be more effective. So effectively, the reason why they were self-destructing was because of their organization design, right? They had not created cross-functional teams. So if you imagine a scaled agility program based off really good service design, actually really good UI design and really good research, but then they'd organize their teams functionally. So there was a lot of just work being pushed about, right? And we know there's got to be a lot of refactoring within that process, which is going to damage the quality. And therefore, there was just lots of work happening. Everyone was very busy. Everyone was being very efficient in their functions, but there was no way for work to flow effectively across all of those different skill sets that were needed to create that 2B customer journey. So
can you give us an example of what those problems looked like once you started looking at it, and especially emphasize what might already be happening in Luke's company right now, working with let's say a similar bank, but where things aren't yet hitting the proverbial fan, but the problems are already there. So how would we detect those problems?
First of all, you can see it just by the way the teams are designed, right? Because we know you should have a cross-functional team. So if you just look at the design of each team and you see that within their own team, they're not able to take an item from the 2B backlog, right, from the change that you're trying to create. So not able to take that item all the way from backlog into production, then you have a problem. I think the other indicator is, how is that backlog designed? And this was one of their problems too. They'd taken that 2B customer journey, which included front end, back end, and then some supporting third-party services, but they hadn't designed their backlog in that way. They hadn't done vertical slicing, as we call it. They'd created all these different horizontals that were then going to feed into these functional teams. So it wasn't the strategy that was wrong. It wasn't the research that was wrong. It was actually the way they were organizing and breaking down that problem to solve. So how's the backlog designed? What's the team's composition? And then from there, the other problems they had was literally that they had no method that allowed them to measure success in a new way. They had no idea of very simple things like an epic burn up chart or a sprint burn down chart. They had no idea of lead time or cycle time. And so again, it was a relatively easy thing to fix in the end for someone with some experience, but they had sort of all of the red flags you wouldn't want to see.
So in your experience, what drives companies to organize that way? Is it just inertia? Is it like the way the management structures are set up? Like, what, in your experience, what are the drivers out there that force companies, and many of them, even knowing that it's a bad idea, still stick to this functionalized organization where you separate things according to architectural layers or even company functions instead of end-to-end customer value delivery?
For me, I think the problem is probably not as big as it used to be, maybe let's say 5 years ago, because we've had so many other industries now move to agility, including government sectors, aerospace, energy companies, education organizations. But, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was a little bit less understood. There was less use cases. So the reason why that was the sticking point for many people back in that moment was, even though their organization had taken a leap of faith to embrace agility, and their organization, or at least someone on the C-level, on the board, someone was at least sold on agility, maybe the people within the organization were not yet sold. And even if they'd been through a workshop, right, and they'd had an experience and they saw differently, they weren't yet able to behave differently. And this is just talking to their identity, right? Like, they've been in a corporate environment, getting success, being promoted, believing in that old system due to their old behaviors. Now, all of a sudden, you tell them that you need to behave in a slightly different way to be effective. They don't believe you. their beliefs are not in sync. Their values aren't in sync. Their identity of how I become successful in a workplace is not in sync. So often it's just because of that identity hasn't shifted with the organization's statements about its own identity, right?
And perhaps that's one of the challenges for us, because when it relates to identity, no matter how much logical arguments we may put forward, we may actually be threatening people's own belief in themselves. And of course, they will immediately reject us, because you can't go against yourself. We're not programmed to do that, right?
Yeah, you end up in depression, right? If you think your identity is no longer valid, if you don't have a new one to cling on to that's in sync with your values and your beliefs, you are going to be very depressed. And so that's one of the reasons why they're not able to shift. I think, but again, it maybe not so much of a problem now, but a few years ago it was. They weren't able to shift because they didn't understand, okay, this new world that you're leading me towards, is it actually going to be the thing that can sustain me in the future? Do I really believe in it as a career path? Can I see how this is going to help me? Or do I think this is just the bank trying to do the new latest thing and it's a fad that's going to pass? And actually then I'm probably better off sticking to my current behaviors and not challenging my identity, because this thing will go soon. And then I'm going to be needing my old skill set. And if I take the leap of faith that you're asking me to, there's no security around it, right? You've also got to think the nature of these transformations, again, back in that context that I'm sharing in a banking environment, it is very much about a job for life, right? Get your bonus, right? Your individual performance matters more than your team.
It's all organized around individual performance, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the performance management that also is hindering those organizations. But they really struggle to get away from it, right? Because the senior people want their big banking bonuses too, which is a key part of their remuneration. So they tussle with it. I think it's got easier now, and I don't think it's so much of a problem now, in my opinion, purely because there's so many more use cases. So back then, when you were pointing to examples of agility being successful, it was just tech, right? And then so people were thinking, oh, it's only a tech thing, it's not a banking thing, right? But now I think there's so many use cases of agility being successful, and the role models of leadership embrace those
it's easier to
principles.
accept that the new identity is possible, right?
Yeah, right. And like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, like just to name two people, they were agile leaders, right? They had agile organizations, and you look at what they have done and what they've created and what they continue to do. There's a significant use case that you can lean on, right? Which 5, 6, 7 years ago was maybe not so strong.
Absolutely. Ryan, thank you very much for sharing this story with us.
My pleasure.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox Podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.